All right, young skillers, pardon my tardiness. Tonight, we're going to go through 5 examples of exception handling. Hopefully, on Tuesday or sometime earlier this week, you went through the previous recording of what exactly exception handling is. Basically, you're just resolving any potential issues that might come up beforehand. So today we're going to cover exception handling for input mismatch. Is it an int? Do we put in a double? Well, there's a mismatch. Exception handling for file not found. Exception handling for any arithmetic, multiplication, dividing kind of error you might receive. Then exception handling for any customized issue. And then I'm going to show you an example of where we're intentionally throwing an exception, and then we comment demonstrating how to handle the exception. I'll do that for all of these because that's what you're going to have to do for homework. To write a program like this, where you're creating an exception, you write a comment in your code, this is the exception, then you write a comment in the code, this is how I'm handling the exception. So more often than not, you're just going to print out some kind of error. But we'll go through that right now. So I'm going to create a new class called input mismatch example. Everybody can see my screen, yes?
Yes.
So the first thing we're going to do, actually, let's put in a comment here of what we're doing.
Professor, can you repeat what you said a few minutes ago when you first came in?
Oh, the homework for this evening, or basically you have until Monday night to do it, is you're going to take one of these examples that we're going through, or you could create your own, and all you have to do is add a comment. This is where, this is the exception, whether it be like we're doing an input mismatch exception here. The next example will be a file not found example. You'll just put a comment on that line. This is the exception being thrown. And then you will create another comment later, basically saying that this is where we're solving the exception. So I'll basically do that in each of these examples. So this example is input mismatch. So that's a very simple one for us to solve because there's actually a class called input mismatch exception. So we import that. And since we're also taking input from the user, we're going to import Java util.scanner. So then I create my class here. Within our class, we need to create a method that's going to allow the user to input something. So we set up an instance or object that allows the user to input any variable. Then we're going to use try. And you'll notice an error's popping up. Try without catch, finally, or resource declarations. Let's just worry about creating the try first. The try makes it so that we determine if the exception actually exists. So first, we're going to produce a message asking the user to enter an integer. Then we're going to assign that as int num, just short for number, equals scanner dot next int. This passes the user input into the integer num. If everything goes well, then all we do is display a number. System.out.println, you entered whatever that number is. However, if they entered something different, like a double, a string, we now have to create a catch. And this is where importing our input mismatch exception class or package comes into play. Because now we create an instance of it. Like we did with our graphics G, this time input mismatch exception E. The E is just short for exception, makes it easy for us. So then within that catch, what should we say? What should the error message be? Franny, what do you want the error message to be?
It has to be like about like anything or
It basically wants to tell the user, hey, you got to input an integer. It can't be something else.
so you have to input. I am a sophomore.
That's what you want to tell the user if they're not putting in an integer?
Yeah.
How's that going to tell them that they need to put in an integer, though?
So
See, if we just put in, I am a sophomore, that's going to display and the user is going to be like, huh? What? What does that have to do with anything? So our message here should inform the user that, hey, the variable's an integer. You need to put in an integer. So how can we say that nicely?
you enter a wrong. I don't know.
Okay. You've entered the wrong input.
Yeah.
Let's add to it. Please enter an integer. This way the user knows. And then you'll notice below this, we have 3 of our closing brackets. One for our class, one for the catch, and one for the method. So after the one for the catch, we have to close our scanner. So we do scanner.close, which now changes or ends the conversation between the user. So for your homework, you would just add a line of code here. Within the try, you would put something like potential input mismatch exception. And then on the line of your catch, you would add a comment resolving potential input mismatch exception by displaying an error message. So when we compile this, go ahead and run the method. Please enter an integer. So if we enter the number 2, you entered 2. There was no issue. However, if we now go and enter Franny's name, we get that mismatch error. You've entered the wrong input. Please enter an integer. Fairly basic, right? So the catch catches that exception that exists, but it only works or is needed to run if there's actually an exception. If there isn't an exception, like in the first example, where we just put in 2, it just runs out that system.out print line, you entered whatever your number is. So again, the catch would be we're resolving the potential input mismatch exception by displaying an error message. And that you've entered the wrong input, please enter an integer. That is you displaying the error message. The try is when you're trying to catch the potential error. So as I said, when we put in the number 2, that's an integer. So after it went through the try, it's over, it's done, it ended. There's no more issue. There's no error that we need to catch.
So
if
just
we
give
went,
me a number, right?
as long as it's an integer. So let's do a double here. So if we enter 14.7, that's a double. So it's telling us, again, you've entered the wrong input. Please use an integer. So it's not necessarily just a number. It's just an integer. Because technically 14.7 is also a number, but Java interprets it as a double because there's a decimal. So does that make sense? So exception handling is pretty simple. You'll notice these programs have a lot less code than we saw last week. However, they're very helpful because they allow us to solve problems before they even happen, before they're even noticed. So next, we're going to create an exception handling program for a file not found issue. So I'm going to create a new class and just call this file handling example. So we're creating an example of a file not found exception. and how to resolve it. So we first need to import the file package. Java.io.file, which allows us to input or output to a file. But within that input-output class, we also have file not found exception. This way, it makes it that much easier to catch them because we know they exist. And then, since you're the person or whoever's using this program would be selecting the input, we have to create an import java.util.scanner to deal with any potential input from the user. So then I create my class, public class, file handling example. I create a method, which is going to have our try and catch. So first, what the try is going to do is it's going to find a potential new file. So we're checking to see if we have a new file by creating a file object. Then we create an instance where we're checking to see if an input is selected. Then we're going to use a while loop. As long as the file has something in it, it exists. So while scanner dot has next line, we're going to create a string called line within it to check if there's a next line. If there is, we're going to output that line. So after that try, going to close the scanner. If there's a next line of code, okay, good. We close the scanner. But after every try, you have to have a catch. You're trying to find any issues, and then once you catch them, we have a solution. So just like last time, our catch is going to utilize that exception we've imported. So catch file not found exception, and we'll just call it E for exception to make it easy for us. But in this example, in addition to our whatever we put in our quotes, we have to add e.getMessage. So it's file not found plus e.getMessage. We're getting any potential error message from our exception we've created. So here, we're creating a potential file not found exception. And with our catch, we're resolving potential file not found exception by displaying error message. And make sure you close your while loop with the scanner.has next line, or else it's going to give you an error message when you try to compile it, like it did me. So it should be while, open parentheses, scanner.has next line, both parentheses, and then the closing parenthesis. So when you go ahead and run, it tells us file not found, non_existent file.txt. The system cannot find the file specified. So that the system cannot find the file specified is what our e.get message provides us. So how did we know that this was automatically going to throw a file not found exception? No one? Unless you had a file on your computer with this name, non_existent_file.txt. If you created a file, name that within the same as your program, wherever this class may be, it would find that. Now it's more common, well, that's a little beyond the scope of what we're doing today. It would be more common to have the user actually be able to select a file from somewhere. But that doesn't show you the exception and how to handle it, because if you would be able to select and find a file and input it, obviously that file is going to be there. It exists. There's no file not found exception. So again, this is what you'd be doing on your homework. You'd have to add in a comment showing that you know what kind of exception is being thrown. And then you need to add a second comment that shows how you would handle it. As I indicated earlier, 90% of the time, it's just going to be through some kind of printing out an error message, like you saw in the first example. And in this example, it's file not found. It names the file that we couldn't find, and then the system cannot find the file specified. So this was our file not found. It gives that e.get message, which displays the rest, which includes our file name, and the system cannot find the file specified. And like I said, if that file actually existed in the same area as your class you've created, then it would be found and there would be no error that's produced. So next, we're going to do a sample or a simple arithmetic exception. So I called this class arithmetic exception example. And you guys are more than welcome to use much less specific names with your classes and all your variables, as I've indicated every class we've done. So we're creating an exception to handle arithmetic issues. So who looked through the slides and or watched my video from Tuesday? What's the most common arithmetic issue you might have? What's the one number you can't divide by?
Zero?
Yep, zero. Can't divide by zero. Gives us an error. So we're going to create our class. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We create our method. Now, what are the two things we do with all exceptions? We have to try, see if it actually exists, and then we have to catch as our resolution. So here we're trying to find any potential arithmetic exception. So we're going to create an int result. So Calvin, give me a number. What should we divide by 10?
I'm
Or
gonna say 2.
2? Okay. So if we do int result equals 2 divided by 0, obviously we know that that's going to give us an error. So we're going to print out result plus a result variable we created. So we know this is going to have an issue because 2 divided by 0 is going to be an error, an issue. So we create a catch. And again, we just call our exception E, just to make it easy, arithmetic exception E. And all we do is the same as the last example. Error plus E dot get message. So we just add a second comment, resolves any potential arithmetic exception by displaying an error message. And we need an extra bracket down at the bottom to close out our class. For some reason, we were one short. And when we compile this, we should have no errors. You'll notice that for the arithmetic exception, we don't need any imports as we did previously. When we go ahead and run, what should our output be? Error divide by 0. Can't divide a number by 0, so we have an error there. It doesn't matter what number we put here, whether it's 2, whether it's 47, whether it's 52, whatever it may be. You run that program, the output's going to stay the same. Error divide by 0. Can't divide a number by 0. So again, for the homework, you're just going to pick any random exception, whether it's one of the ones I covered today, or from the PowerPoint slide deck, or you could create your own, as long as you have that comment. Okay, here's the exception, which is always going to be in the try. And then here's how we're resolving it, which always is going to be the catch. So think of it this way. You're playing baseball. Somebody's throwing the ball to you. You can't catch it unless they throw it, right? Same thing with exceptions. You can't catch it unless there's a try before it. So next, I'm going to create a custom exception handler. This could resolve many, many others that aren't as specific as file input error, arithmetic error, input mismatch error. So I called this class custom exception. And as usual, I'll put all of these examples up on Blackboard for you to look through after class as well. So here we're doing class, not customer, custom exception extends exception. So who remembers from last week? What is this called? We're taking something from another class. What is that called? Custom exception is our subclass. Exception is our superclass. Who remembers from last week? Begins with an I. You might get this, some money, a property, a house. If
Would it be
somebody, go ahead, Grace.
int?
Int?
Like
No.
IT? No. Mm.
It starts with the same 2 letters, though.
Input?
No. If somebody passes away and they give you money, what's it called? Inheritance. So anytime you see this kind of example, the subclass custom exception is inheriting all of the properties from the exception class. This way we don't have to write over and over again our different issues. So we're going to create a method here, public custom exception. And we're going to pass a string called message. Then within that method, you'll remember from last week, you use super to inherit anything from the superclass, which in this instance is exception. So we're now passing that string message, whatever it may be, from the superclass here, exception, into the subclass custom exception. So then we need to create a class that will resolve that. So we call it public class custom exception example. We create our method within there. Excuse me. Now, what are the two things we have to do? I mentioned this in the others. The two things, whenever you're throwing an exception, first you have to try. Your try is, hey, does this exception actually exist? Then your catch, which, okay, this exception exists. How do we solve it? So your try would be to try and check any potential custom exception. So to make sure that we double check any potential custom exception, we do what's called throw. If it doesn't catch it the first time, we throw it to make sure that it's caught. And then every try has a matching catch. So with the catch, we're resolving any potential custom exception. But you'll notice this red squigglies, it's because we have to create a custom exception. So it's custom exception E, just because E is short for exception. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So in this example, I'm just going to do as I did for the last two. Print out custom exception caught plus e.get message. So that goes and prints out just as we did with our prior examples. File not found. Okay, it creates a message. Error divide by 0, it creates a message for you. So when you compile and run that now, custom exception caught, custom exception occurred. It's going to happen that way every time because, as I mentioned, within our try, our message is custom exception occurred, which is passed to our get message. It's always going to occur because even if it tried to catch it and no error existed, it couldn't find any error. This line of code, throw new custom exception, automatically throws that exception. There's an error. So it in essence goes try, catch, throw in this process. So I'll add a comment there that it makes sure that any exception is thrown. So whatever we indicated here is always going to be passed to our e.get message in this example. So anytime you see throw within a try, that means even if there is no exception, we're going to go ahead and throw it anyway. And this is called exception handling because we're trying to handle all of these issues beforehand, before we even need to really resolve them. So last but not least, I'm going to show a different way where you can throw an arithmetic error. And I'll call this exception demo. So remember, with the arithmetic ones, you don't need to use any imports. So we create our public class exception demo. Then we need to create our method. And within our method, again, always has to be a try and a catch. The try, we're checking for any potential exception that exists. The catch, oh, we found it. Here's how we resolve it. So we always create a try first. We will create an integer called result. And instead of just typing 2/0, we can use divide. And then I add the comment, this is intended to throw an arithmetic exception. We'll need two numbers here. So let's do 89. And then obviously we're dividing by 0. So the second number is going to be 0. Then we're going to print out our result is, our result variable. So in this instance, we know that there's going to be an exception thrown. Anything divided by 0 cannot be done. So our tries always have to be matched by a catch. So we have to create an instance of the exception. Arithmetic exception E. And this is how we're going to handle it. Handles arithmetic exception with error message to user. So what do we want that error message to be? Grace?
Yeah.
What do you want the error message to say?
Exception demo.
So if we say exception demo here, does that really tell the person looking at the screen anything? We want to tell them that there's an error, right? So maybe we just yell at them. Cannot divide by 0. There's an error. So now we're going to utilize this divide in a method here, public static int divide, where we're going to create an integer dividend and an integer divisor. So that now Java knows, or whatever your compiler you're using, or IDE knows dividend divisor. So this is going to be a new method, divide, that allows us to divide 89 by 0 so that we create that error message. So we create an if. So if divisor double equals 0, what's going to happen? We're going to throw an exception. In this case, an arithmetic exception. So we have to create an instance. Okay, we're throwing a new error message, divide by 0. Can't do that, not allowed. So then after our if statement, we're going to return dividend divided by divisor, which is our 89 divided by 0. Then we need to add an extra bracket to close out our initial class here. So when you compile this, what's going to happen? Let's go ahead and run and show you. We run the main method. cannot divide by 0. We get our catch. So instead of just doing int result 89/0, we create a method that now utilizes that. So if we did now 89 divided by 5 and compiled and ran that program, it now returns a result, 17. There is no error to catch. There's no exception to catch. But again, we put that back to 0. Can't divide by 0. We're going to get the same error. And it would happen just the same way. See, cannot divide by 0. It would happen just the same way if we went back to our arithmetic exception example. If we change it, let's change it from 47 divided by 0 to 48 divided by, let's say, 4. If we went ahead and ran that now, instead of getting an error, we now get that result. 48 divided by 4 is 12. We put it back to 0, compile, run it again. We get that same error message, cannot divide by 0. Error, divide by 0. So either way of handling the arithmetic example is fine, using the e.get message or simply displaying an issue output example. Cannot divide by 0. So again, the first arithmetic exception example, very basic. We're just doing int result 48, or what was it initially, 47 divided by 0. If there's no 0, we print out our result. If there is a 0, error, can't divide by 0. Or you could create a whole new method in order to divide those two numbers. So we're creating divide, 89, which is our dividend, 0, our divisor. So obviously the first example, much less code. We just put both numbers together to create that int result, as opposed to creating a whole new method in order to do the division for us. So either way is perfectly fine. I wanted to show you how there is two separate examples or ways to go ahead and do that. So upcoming, we have the homework number, I believe it's 6. Yes. So homework number 6 is basically what I just showed you. You're going to write a Java program that throws an exception, but have a comment in your code which demonstrates you know what to do to solve the exception thrown. So like I showed you in all of these, that's what these two comments would be. Your try, this is intended to throw an arithmetic exception. Your catch handles arithmetic exception with error message to user. Same setup with the custom example. Make sure exception is thrown using the throw. The try is potential custom exception. The catch is resolve potential custom exception. Same with the arithmetic example. The try, we're trying to find potential arithmetic exception. The catch resolves potential arithmetic exception by displaying error message. Same with the file handling. Okay, we're creating a potential file not found exception. You could add on this line of code here. We know there'll be an error or exception because this file is not located on our computer. And then the catch, we just have a comment resolving potential file not found exception by displaying an error message. So that's more than likely all you're going to do when you catch an exception, is to display an error message. You'll notice all we did with the first example, the input mismatch example, was to just indicate an error. You've entered the wrong input. Please enter an integer. But you'll remember back to the screen that popped up, we only had these second and third opportunities after I recompiled and reran the program. Usually you'd want to have a situation where, okay, the error message, then they have another opportunity to create input. But as I indicated, I just want to create the most simple examples for you guys to potentially have. So we could add here these 2 lines of code. Okay, we caught an error. Now we're going to give you a chance to fix your error. So if we did that, and hopefully it works and doesn't make a liar out of me. If we went ahead and did that for an input mismatch example, we go ahead and run it. So let's say we enter Franny again for the integer. You've entered the wrong input. Please enter an integer. Okay. So you see, it now allows us a second opportunity to do it. We enter 12. It should go ahead and work. So you can potentially do it all at once if you felt like doing so, but that's entirely up to you. So I am going to post these 5 examples for you on Blackboard. Like I said, you could choose from any of those, just so long as you have those 2 comments. Okay, here's the exception we have, okay, which is usually going to be your try. And then within your catch, here's what we're doing to resolve this. And homework assignment 6 is due the 9th. So what is that, Monday night? And as always, I've provided extra links here for YouTube videos in case you're not entirely sure, you need more help, etc. And since we had no meeting on Tuesday, the recording's been there since probably Sunday night, Monday, for you to look through. On Tuesday and hopefully the rest of the Tuesday sessions, we'll be meeting on Zoom. Like I said, the last 2 Tuesdays I've had doctor's appointments. I do have 2 more in November, but I'm hoping to schedule them for earlier in the day. Excuse me, so that we can meet and go through any potential questions you might have. So if there are no questions regarding these programs, like I said, exception handling is fairly straightforward and simple. Like I said, the main point is to try to resolve issues beforehand. Okay, we know there's the possibility where if you're dividing numbers, if you divide by 0, there's going to be an error. So let's handle that beforehand because we know that's a possible outcome. So if there are no questions on any of these, Like I said, I'll post this code up on Blackboard for everybody to look through in case I went too fast. But otherwise, if there are no questions, I'll see all of you on Tuesday.
Professor, could I talk when everybody leaves real fast?
Yep,
Okay.
give me a moment here. I'll stop the recording.